Hello again, how's it going? Hope all is fantastic. Today we're going to talk about something interesting and quite fascinating. Some children's storybooks, as we all know and love, the Dr. Seuss of all tales. From Green Eggs and Ham to the Grinch, of course, during all famous Christmas tales. Here's some backstory on the great artist and some dark tales of him as well. Theodore Ted Seuss Gazel was born on March 2nd of 1904 in Springfield, Massachusetts, and years before his middle name became Synopsis in rhyming whimsy children's books. The Seuss books was also his mother's maiden name. In their 1995 biography of the author Judith and Neil Morgan, said that connection carried significance for Seuss, who's credited his mother inspired his well-known rhymes. Henrietta Seuss would chant softly to her children to bedtime stories with rhymes. Dr. Seuss grew up inspired by exotic animals at the Springfield Zoo in Massachusetts, where his father eventually became a superintendent. His 1967 book, If I Ran the Zoo, and his lifelong fascination with unusual animals stem from his past. In turn, many of our childhoods have been influenced by his love of creatures, big and small. Seuss and his wife's apartment on Park Avenue in New York became filled with his taxidermy wall art in the 1930s. When Seuss was in his late 20s and early 30s, his father would ship him parts of deceased animals from the zoo, including horns, antlers, rabbit ears, and bills. Dr. Seuss's taxidermy was quite interesting, to say the least. It is not technically taxidermy, which is why it is largely deemed unorthodox taxidermy as description. He used to primarily use plaster, screws, metal, laminate, and oil paint in his sculptures, adding real animal parts as well, in only a select few option categories with the animal positioning. In his tuft gusher taxidermy, for example, Dr. Seuss used no animal parts at all, opting instead for a shaving brush to create his realistic tuft of hair. The collection is full of imaginary treasures, to say the least. A green bird with a giant beak has a smaller version in a esque pouch, and also a dubbed kangaroo bird as well. A pursed lip blue animal with dull eyes and a crown with a magnificent set of real antlers. It is also dubbed the seagoing dilemma fish. The somewhat freakish Anthony Dreck's gulpverb has a set of big floppy big ears and a long brown neck. Like all of his sculptures, the true creativity is best seen in person. Most of these sculptures you can see within his own work, such as the long sawed-off tooth for the fish that he's created as well. The popular children's author was childless. When asked why a writer of children's book had no children of his own, Nell said Seuss had a response ready. You make them. I'll amuse them. Seuss wrote his first children's book, ABC Book of Creatures, in 1931, which was unpublished. Around the same time, his first wife, Helen Palmer, learned she could not biologically carry children, according to the Morgan's 1995 biography. I don't think that's a coincidence, Nell said as well. In some ways, he wrote for children to speak his own words, for that to need in himself. After Helen died by suicide in 1967, Seuss eventually remarried to Aubrey Diamond, who had 2 daughters in 1968. In more than 40 books to his name, including The Cat in the Hat and The Grinch, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, of course, Strange Vehicles, Animals, and Nonsense were the author's way to communicate with children in general. Unlike other books during that time frame that spoke morals from Victorian-type era, Dr. Seuss's stories did not tell people or children how to behave. He simply made children's novels a lot more fun as he wrote compared to others. Compare The Cat in the Hat's chaos. The lines like, look, look, oh look, see Jane, that made up words and insist rhymes did not diminish the Lorax's environmental message or dampen the anti-discrimination story of the Nietzsche's. He took children seriously, he said. When asked about writing for children, he said, I don't write for children. I write for people. He sold over 600 million copies during his lifetime, and within 20 languages as well, by the time of his death. In 1925, in the midst of the probation era, Seuss and his friends were caught drinking gin in his dorm. As punishment, Seuss was stripped of his editorial relationship as the college humor magazine, Jack-O-Lantern, which was the name of the thing. Hopefully it wasn't during Halloween as well. However, he continued to publish work under a variety of pseudonyms, including T. Seuss, several other varying machinaries such as Dr. Theodore Seuss, appeared over the years, which he eventually shortened to Dr. Seuss, as his go-to profession pen name. In 1961, with his book 10 Apples Up to the Top, Seuss began collaborating with illustrators for books to write. For these, he used the synonym of Theo Lesiège, which is Giselle spelled backwards. He also published one book in 1975, Because a Little Bug Went Cuckoo, under the pen name Rosetta Stone. And although there is no known evidence to support the claim, he also said that Seuss meant to save his real name for the great American novel that he would one day write. Of course he did. He is one of the greatest of all children's books. Instead, Seuss debuted The Cat and the Grinch the same year in 1957, two of the most famous characters that he is known by. The Cat and the Grinch were also facades of the man Nell said. The rule-breaking, mischievous cat spoke to the author's sense of play, while the Grinch represented the chaotic part of Dr. Seuss' personality. He had a vanity license named The Grinch as well. Beginning in 1941, Dr. Seuss produced political cartoons for the left-wing newspaper PM in New York. In those pages, he criticized the U.S. policy of isolation and urging the country to enter the World War II. He also lambasted anti-Semitism and racism. Although his depiction of Japanese people was exaggerated with racial features provoked during the problematic times during that time frame, by 1942, Dr. Seuss was keen on joining the Navy, but was instead asked to make war propaganda films with Oscar-winning director Frank Coppola, which I believe he made Godfather. Joined by P.D. Eastman of Go Dog Go, famed Mel Blanc, and Chuck Jones. Chuck Jones made Warner Brothers type films such as Bugs Bunny. Among others, Seuss co-created Private Snuff's Situation Normal Air Force Up, which is also known, a cartoon made for military uniform personnel and recruits. A black and white cartoon series was also off-color and a hit with soldiers. It was so cold, it would freeze the nuts off a Jeep. One cartoon began. Seuss ended up writing most of his own cartoons. This series provoked a training ground for the rhymes, story development, and worked with limited vocabulary. Seuss' first forte in children's books and literature was his book And to the Thing That I Saw in on Mulberry Street in 1937, which he also made a taxidermy creature made from that book. Before then, he had a successful career in advertising. He wrote a copy and drew advertisements all over the world for companies such as Standard Oil and Flit Bug Spray, which in particular became a more lucrative form of work. Seuss had his first taste of contribution for American drawings in 1928 with the catchphrase "Quick, Henry the Flit," from one of his ads of the company Flit in particular. The ad campaign was such a hit that Seuss continued to produce work for the company for almost 17 years. The only good thing Adolf Hitler did in starting World War II was that he enabled me to join the army and finally stop drawing, Dr. Seuss said. Quick Henry the Flit, Seuss is quoted as saying in Thomas Finch's biography of the author of Dr. Seuss. The Dr. Seuss editor as well, Bennett Cerf, bet him he couldn't write a book using 50 or fewer words. The result in the 1960s Green Eggs and Ham story, although the Cat in the Hat and the Grinch are among Seuss's most iconic characters, The story of Sam I Am trying to convince an unknown character to eat green eggs and ham has sold more than 8 million copies since publication, according to 2011 Publishers Weekly list. Fascinating. I hope you like eggs that are not green. In 1950s, if I ran the zoo, a kid rattles off a list of fantasy creatures. In 1950s, if I ran the zoo, it lists a whole bunch of creatures that are from fantasy world of Dr. Seuss's mind. I'll sail to Katru and bring back a Cooch, a Pre and a Prue, a Nurka Nerd, and a Zikaratu. In the book, a sign identifies a nerd as a red and yellow white-haired sourpuss. It appears to be the first documented instance of the word, which has since morphed into a put-down for bookish people. Writing for the Boston Globe, Ben Zimmer said the word nerd has not one particular historical source, but it is a credible theory that Dr. Seuss played a role in the popularization of it. And while Seuss didn't invent the word Grinch, the word meaning a grouchy person is all him, Nell said. He actually changed the language. There are poets that do that, but it's also not that common. Nurgle, however, has yet to catch on. The Seven Lady Gavich, the true facts that concern history's Barrett's family, was a flop when it came out in 1939. The book featured the unclothed sisters throughout the book in an unsexy story, which was quite unfamiliar with Dr. Seuss. Seuss would like to say he felt it was a flop because he couldn't draw sexy naked ladies. More like unraveling odd creatures. As a point, imagine naked ladies drawn by Dr. Seuss was not particularly erotic. On a subsequent issues, there was a claim on the books that Lady Goddess was reissued by demand, which is a lie because no one wanted it. Besides being an interesting failure, a book of naked illustrations also upset the people's notion. Besides being a failure substantially, people didn't want the notoriety that Dr. Seuss was writing or drawing these creatures of nakedness. His other adult book was the picture book You're Only Old Once, published in 1986, about the people of growing older, which he died in 1991, which is quite interesting. I'm curious if he made a self-portrait. In March of 2021, Dr. Seuss's Enterprise announced that it would no longer publish or license the books, and to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street, If I Ran the Zoo, Mick Clegg's Pool, On Beyond Zebra, Scrambled Egg Super, and The Cat's Quizzer. These books portray people in ways that are hurtful and wrong, as the company has said. So curious, what's your favorite Dr. Seuss book? There's also interesting factors of looking at his old artworks, which is quite dark and quite amazing as well. A lot of his taxidermy artwork is on sale, or some of his work is on sale, and also remade versions of his work that you could buy as well. It goes from $3,000 to $10,000 and more. Isn't that quite fascinating? Anyways, what is your favorite children's book? I love Dr. Seuss and also Goosebumps. R.L. Stine, of course. Anyway, have a great one. Bye.